Is your 1967 to 72 Chevy or GMC Truck cab just too far gone? Over the last 50 plus years, these cabs have been smashed, dented, scratched, burnt, and trying to become one with the earth again. You know, rust. Finding a good used cab is a great way to save you a lot of time, money, and labor. But there are several important things to consider before you just go buy a cab and swap it over the weekend. So stick around and I'll show you what I mean. Have you seen in my previous videos, GM made several changes to the old 67 to 72 truck parts over this 6-year period. And the cabs, they were no exception. If you're looking for a good donor cab to make repairs, or you're going for a full cab swap, I'm glad you're here. Using a donor cab to make metal repairs, robbing an AC dash, or going through and stealing other parts off of these things can save you a lot of time and money. But if you're going for a full cab swap, there's several things that you need to consider. Number one is, can you do it legally? You do have to remember that the VIN plate is attached to the door jamb. So, if you are taking one cab from one chassis and putting it on another, you're also taking the vehicle identification number with it. You definitely need to check with the Department of Motor Vehicles in your state to see if a full cab swap is even an option or if it's even legal. To swap cabs in my state, that would require a vehicle inspection and a Kansas assigned VIN number. So they'd actually remove the original VIN plate from the cab that I'm using, take it off, and put a Kansas VIN number on it, which is a sticker. Your 1972 Chevy C10 could all of a sudden become a 2021 Chev 72. Now, if you're going for an investment show quality build, this is probably something I'd try to avoid. This could really decrease the value of the truck. But if you're just using this as a day-to-day driver or an old farm beater, I don't think it really matters. So the second thing is making sure you buy the right cab for your year and make. So here's the big question. When should you repair a cab versus replace it? Well, what's your time worth? LMC and Classic Parts, they make patch panels for about every inch of these cabs. But if you're having to replace the inner and outer rocker panels, the A-pillar, part of the roof, the front cowl, the floor pans, well, I think the answer is getting pretty clear. But if you are going to replace your old junk cab, make sure you're buying a good used cab. That way you immediately don't have to put time, money, and labor into that one as well. There are a lot of problem areas on these old cabs, so let's take a look at a few. A very common area would be the cab corners, or where a cab corner used to be. But this is pretty common. Not that hard of a replacement if you're doing the inner and outer rockers all at once. But again, it's just more time and labor. Another problem area to look at is on the front of the firewall. Right here where these two metal lips come together, water can get trapped underneath there. It's not a bad idea to run seam sealer under here, but do check this front lip, because if not, you have to cut a lot of this firewall out and weld in a new patch panel. Another area to look for is this front cowl. A lot of times debris and leaves will fall down in between these louvers, and when they do, they get trapped in these air buckets. If there's leaves and debris stuck down in here and water pours in, it can't drain out through the bottom. If these old buckets get filled, it has nowhere to drain out, and what we see on the kick panel is rust beginning from the inside out. One area that commonly gets overlooked, especially when you're going to be buying trucks, is check out this front drip rail edge. A lot of times this seam sealer over the years fails, and water can penetrate down underneath of it and begin rusting from the outside in. You can see with this one, there's zero seam sealer left. So the water is able to penetrate right underneath and work its way inside. You'll see how bad it runs down the A-pillar. So you can see on this 72 what happens. Again, once that water penetrates through that seam sealer, it just starts rotting away from the inside out. So unfortunately, this truck really needs a new A-pillar because it's pretty gnarly. Climb up on these trucks, make sure that it is good, especially if you're going to be buying one of these trucks, because the interior roof line here can severely be rusted out, and it's not an easy task to go back and cut and re-weld these in. I'll show you on another one of my pickups how bad it can be. So you can see just above the windshield that when we don't put the seam sealer in and it gets underneath and begins to rust from the outside in, this is what you're left with. All the 1967 to 72 cab shells will fit on the 67 to 72 chassis, but again, each year there were some type of change to the cab. So one of the more noticeable changes of the 67 to 72 cabs were that in 1967, this back rear window would have been smaller. Not on all of them, but the majority. 68 through 72, they were the big rear window. Now if we look at this 1972 C50 dump truck, we generally said that the small back windows were only something that came out in 1967, but when you got into these bigger trucks, this was still an option even in the latter years. So if we look in this 1972, this is an AC cab truck. On the driver and passenger side, it does have the AC vents and it's got a center vent as well. So if we slide over to a non-AC cab, you can see now there's no driver or passenger side AC vents, or there's not one in the middle either. So if we look at an AC cab truck on the firewall, it's going to look different than what just a regular heater truck would be. Different openings and extra holes. So if we look at the firewalls on a non-AC cab truck, it's a little bit different openings. We are missing a couple holes for the AC lines to go through the firewall. If you're looking at the outside of the firewall, the 1967 to 70 trucks had what they used was a throttle rod. You can see that this was actually mounted on the outside of the firewall. Your throttle rod was then connected to your carburetor. Whereas the 1971-72, they transitioned over to a throttle cable. You no longer see the throttle rod mounting bracket on the outside of the firewall. Another thing you might see on the cabs is in 1969, it would have been the first year you could have the exterior cargo lamp on the trucks. Now this was an option, but it began in '69. Quick safety tip. When you jump in and out of these pickups that have been sitting for a long time, if you don't want to go into anaphylactic shock, take a quick gander before you jump into these things. Another difference we'll see is that in 1967 and 68, the fuse panel was mounted horizontally, whereas 69 through 72, it was mounted vertically. Another difference between the 1967 and 68 through 72 was the cigarette plug. Now, in 1967, this plug was actually flat with the dash, whereas the 68 to 72 was actually recessed in. Another difference we saw in the 1969 to 72 was the left foot emergency brake pedal. Before in 1967 and 68, there would have been a hand emergency brake just underneath the steering column. Another thing that the 71-72 had was what they called a floating gas or accelerator pedal. The 1967 to 70, the accelerator pedal was actually mounted to the floor, and the pedal assembly goes up through the firewall connecting to the throttle rod, which is under the hood leading to the carburetor. So as we look at the rear view mirror in the 1967 to 70 trucks, it is mounted from the roof line, but you can see the roof is smooth and we just have screws going right into the roof. If we slide over to a 1971, the rear view mirror on this one was screwed to the roof line, and you can see there is a pad and also the roof line protrudes out. This is something that you would find in the 1971 only. So when you look at this truck, this is again another 1972, but there are no screw holes for the rear view mirror because this one would have been glued to the windshield. In 1972, rear view mirrors were glued to the windshield. So you can see the 1971-72 on the back door jamb has these pressure relief vents, whereas the 1967 to 70s did not. So as we move to the interior of these trucks, the old 67 to 72 C Series was the same cab as the K Series, but the K was a four-wheel drive. That would mean that it would have the high removable transmission hump. The same in the C Series if it was a four-wheel drive or a big block. When it came to four-speed trucks, it would have this taller transmission hump that was removable. You just had to take the bolts out. The old 1967 to 72s only came with lap belts. If you look up towards the roof lines, that little red plug there, if you pop that out, it is reinforced behind. So we can put an aftermarket 3-point lap shoulder belt seat belt system in here for a little bit more safety. So now you've seen the differences of the old 67 to 72 GM truck cabs. Now, the shells itself were pretty much the same, but there were small differences from year to year. If you're going for that year-specific build, you do need to ensure that you're buying the right cab for your make and model, especially if it's an AC cab, a stick shift, a four-wheel drive, whatever it may be. Another option is you can go online and actually buy brand new remanufactured cabs. This will save you a ton of time and labor not to have to do any repairs, but before you go out and spend close to $10,000 on one, you do need to check with the Department of Motor Vehicles in your state and make sure you can get that cab to become street legal on your chassis. If you guys are getting value from these videos, hit the like button, become a subscriber, and type down the old clickety-clack if you know of any other differences of the 67 to 72 truck cabs. Oh yeah, and don't forget to ring the dinger. Ring the dinger.